For a long time, the go-to metaphor for the brain has been a computer, processing information with ones and zeros, right? But what if that's just completely wrong? Today, we're going to explore a groundbreaking new way of seeing how our brains actually learn, adapt, and even get a jump on the future. And it's not like a computer at all. It's something way more elegant and way more alive. All right, to kick things off, check out this quote from Dr. Earl Miller, a neuroscientist at MIT. He's basically saying that all those squiggly lines you see on an EEG, brainwaves, they aren't just random background noise. No, he argues they are the key. They're how the brain organizes everything, the secret engine behind our thoughts, our actions, our very will. Okay, so let's jump right into the first big idea here. And to really get it, we've got to first challenge that old familiar comparison we all know, the brain as a digital computer. And this slide really lays out the two competing ideas. On the left, you have the old school thought. Neurons are like tiny switches, and learning just means tweaking the connections between them. But on the right, you have this new, fascinating idea. Yeah, the connections store stuff long-term, sure, but the real thinking, the actual moment-to-moment computation, that happens when whole waves of electrical activity flow and interact. Think of it like ripples meeting in a pond, creating these complex, beautiful new patterns. That's where the magic happens. I love this analogy from Dr. Miller because it gives us this amazing visual. He says neurons aren't just buzzing around randomly like a swarm of insects. No, it's way more organized. He says they're like a flock of birds in the sky, a murmuration, all moving together in these huge, coordinated, purposeful waves. It's a complete shift in thinking, right? We're not talking about single little neurons anymore. We're talking about these massive, synchronized patterns of activity. So, okay, this whole analog orchestra idea is super cool, but is it real? How can we actually see it working? Well, let's zoom in on a really clever experiment from researchers at Sorbonne University. They basically set up a test to catch the brain right in the act of adapting to something new and totally unexpected.
The setup itself was pretty simple, but don't let that fool you. It was genius. People just had to use a joystick to move a cursor to a target. Sounds easy, right? But here's the twist. The researchers suddenly rotated the cursor's movement. So now when you push the joystick forward, the cursor shoots off to the side. Your brain is getting totally wrong feedback. It had to scramble and build a whole new map of how things worked just to hit that simple target.
So to really understand what was going on, the scientists broke the learning process into two parts. First, on the left, you have the transition state. This is that messy, clumsy beginning where you're making a ton of mistakes. And then on the right, you've got the stable state. That's after you've figured it out and your movements are smooth and accurate. By separating these two, they could compare what the brain was doing when it was struggling versus when it was in the zone. And wow, you can actually see the learning curve right here. That red line shows the errors while that weird rotation is active. Just look at how fast it drops. In just the first 16 tries, there's a massive 80% drop in mistakes. This is so important because it proves the brain isn't just reacting to mistakes after the fact, it's actively building a new mental model of this bizarre world, and it's doing it fast. Okay, so we've established the brain is a super fast learner. But the billion-dollar question is, how? And this is where it gets really, really interesting. We're going to stop looking at what the people are doing with the joystick and start looking at what their brain is doing before they even move a muscle. Yeah, this was the central mystery they were trying to solve. They didn't just want to see the brain go, oops, I made a mistake. They wanted to catch it in the act of thinking, okay, I think I know what to do next. They were looking for a signal of pure anticipation. And boom, here it is, the big discovery. What you're looking at is a map of brain activity just before the person moves the joystick. That's the zero line. Now look at that top left box. That's during the tricky rotation task. See that big orange and red blob? That's a huge burst of beta waves, a type of brain activity linked to focus and planning. And here's the mind-blowing part. This signal shows up as early as 2 seconds before they even move, and it gets stronger and stronger the better they get. This isn't the brain reacting to something. This is the brain predicting what's about to happen. So let's just recap why this beta signal is such a game changer. First, it's anticipatory. It happens way before the action. Second, it's predictive. The stronger the signal, the better the person did on their very next try. It's also specific. I mean, it really only popped up when they were learning that new difficult rule. And finally, it seems to be purposeful. It's almost like the brain's way of raising its hand and saying, hey, I think I figured this out. Now, a signal this clear and powerful doesn't just appear out of thin air, right?
There has to be a whole network in the brain working together to create it. So the next logical question is, which parts of the brain are on this adaptation team?
It turns out there is a team of three main players. You've got the cerebellum, which we used to think was just for motor control, like balance, but now we know it's a major player in making cognitive predictions. Then there's the parietal cortex, which is like the brain's sensory data hub. And finally, you have the prefrontal cortex. That's the CEO, the boss, taking in all the reports and making the final call on the strategy. And they all work together in this really neat three-step loop. Step 1, the cerebellum and parietal cortex look at what just happened and assess the situation. Step 2, they send out that beta wave signal, basically telling the prefrontal cortex how confident they are that they know what to do next. And step 3, the prefrontal cortex, the CEO, gets that message and uses it to update the game plan for the very next attempt. It's this beautiful, continuous feedback loop of prediction and correction.
All right, let's pull the camera back now, because this whole thing is about so much more than just a joystick. What we've just seen in this little lab task is actually a window into a whole new way of thinking about how our minds work, period. Even the authors of the study point this out. They say their work helps prove that the cerebellum isn't just a motor part of the brain. Nope, it's deeply involved in the cognitive side of things, and how we think and adapt.
And this ties everything back together perfectly with what Dr. Miller was saying at the beginning. Remember how he said the prefrontal cortex builds models of the world? Well, this study shows us how it does it. Those anticipatory beta waves we saw, that's the signal. That's the raw data the prefrontal cortex uses to build and constantly update its map of reality. So we've come full circle, right back to this idea of analog computation. Your brain isn't running code and crunching ones and zeros. It's working with these waves of electricity that merge and interact and form these incredibly complex patterns. And that method is not only super efficient, it's what gives us our amazing flexibility to learn and adapt to pretty much anything life throws at us.
And the big takeaway here is that this isn't just for lab experiments. This is happening in your brain all the time. It's how you learn to play a guitar chord, how a tennis player adjusts for the wind, how you figure out what to say next in a tricky conversation. It's the brain's fundamental process. Build a model of the world and use it to predict what to do next.
And that leaves us with one last kind of mind-bending thought to chew on. If the brain's main job is to create these intricate, interacting patterns of waves to understand the world, then what are we? Could it be that our thoughts, our memories, our entire sense of who we are is just the shape of that pattern at any given moment? It's a huge idea, and it could change how we think about, well, everything.